शुरू करें?
I think we should start now.
Yes, ma'am.
We cannot wait.
No, we have to wait. KP Singh. Professor Grover,
Yes,
shall we start?
I think let KP join.
I think it's better because if he has any technical issues, it's better.
बात करके देखो कि कहीं कोई प्रॉब्लम तो नहीं आ रही उनके।
नहीं, आगे मैं हमारे
जुड़ रहे हैं मैम। हाँ जी।
Welcome, Professor KP Singh. Good morning.
I didn't realize that KP was Kamal Priya Singh. I mean, this is a highly degenerate name.
Actually, I was. Good morning, sir.
Hi, Kamal.
I was confused. Actually, I thought it is other KP because I am too young for these activities. And I have not also prepared any formal introduction for you.
No, we like the informal ones.
You
are always more interesting.
You must have been taught by Ram.
Yeah, sure. That is what I'll speak about a little bit.
Yeah, that is the reason why I spoke to you to introduce him.
So let us start
Yes, ma'am.
the proceedings this morning. I welcome all of you on this forum of SPSTI. We are holding this web series on institution building in association with the Chandigarh chapters of the Science Academies and Punjab Engineering College. So very thankful to today's speaker, Professor Partha Majumder, who will be speaking on Prasanta Chandra Mahalanobis. And welcome today. It happens to be the birthday of Kavi Guru Rabindranath Tagore. And it is very appropriate that we are talking about Mahalanobis, who was a contemporary of Tagore. They were fellow travelers in times of upheaval and times of progress for Indian science. So let me hand over to Professor Arun K. Grover, who will give brief remarks on this lecture series. Professor Grover.
So good morning, everyone. I welcome all of you to the 14th lecture of the series titled Institution Building and Nurture Initiatives to commemorate the 75th year of Indian independence. This series was conceived at the prompting of President of SPSTI, namely Mr. Dharamveer, who had posed a question as to how we should, that is the SPSTI in partnership with Chandigarh chapters of Science Academies, how should they together commemorate the Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav. So if we leave aside the first two Indian Fellows of the Royal Society, namely R.C. Garsetji and Shri Ramanujam, the subsequent Fellows of the Royal Society from India were all products of the Western system of education initiated by the East India Company in 1857 when they started the three universities and affiliated the colleges to these universities in the three presidencies of India. British had no intention of nurturing scientists in India. However, some of the bright Indian students pursued their passion to the limit and managed to reach the frontiers of science in their chosen spheres. and thereby reduce the gap between themselves and the British scientists working at the frontiers of science. As the gap between the best amongst the natives and the best amongst the rulers reduced, the native Indian scientists gained confidence to nurture and inspire more young students in India and build a community of Indian scientists. Hello. So let me continue. So as the gap between some of the leading Indian scientists and the British scientists at the frontiers of science reduced, the Indian scientists, they started to nurture more young students in the colleges and the universities of India, and they built a community of Indian scientists which was ready to take on the development of India as the independence arrived. So when the Western education started in India, the science subjects were typically taught only in the medical schools. No wonder that the medical doctor, Dr. Mahendralal Sarkar, became the first to commence the Indian Association of Cultivation of Science at Calcutta in 1876. J.C. Bose and P.C. Ray contributed to the activities of IASc as they returned from England to teach and commence research at Presidency College, Calcutta. Swami Vivekanand, Ashutosh Mukherjee, Brajendranath Seal were contemporaries during their college days at Calcutta. Vivekanand had motivated Jamshedji Tata to create Indian Institute of Science, which commenced operations after the passing away of Vivekanand and Jamshedji in 1904. Thereafter, after the IISc, Pandit Madan Mohan Malviya and Ashutosh Mukherjee created the BHU and the College of Science, Calcutta, roughly at the same time. So in 1915, P.C. Mahalanobis, who had proceeded to England and was working at Cambridge with C.T.R. Wilson, he was on a holiday in India. Okay, and the First World War was in full bloom. So you see the parallel between Bhabha and India at the beginning of the Second World War, and P.C. Mahalanobis is there at the First World War. So Ashutosh Mukherjee offered him a teaching position, and Ashutosh Mukherjee had created this chaired professorship. One of them went to C.V. Raman, and the one in philosophy went to a contemporary of Ashutosh Mukherjee, namely B.N. Seal. And Brajendranath Seal was the professor, chaired professor of philosophy, and also appointed as the registrar of Calcutta University by the Vice-Chancellor Ashutosh Mukherjee. So it is B.N. Seal who motivated P.C. Mahalanobis to take up an exercise where the statistics had to be learned and applied. So that is the start of P.C. Mahalanobis into the field of statistics. And as the P.C. Mahalanobis was a contemporary, we all know, he was born 1893, and he had qualified class 10 1 year ahead of S.N. Bose, Meghnad Saha, and J.C. Ghosh. So we'll get the story from Partha in detail, but they were all contemporaries. And as the India moved towards independence, it is Saha who gave the idea of having planning in India to Subhash Bose, who was a few years junior to Saha. And now you can see how all these people are together and how they were in contact with the political leaders of India in a different way. So the politicians were fighting the British politically, and the scientists were planning how to develop India as India would become independent. So long before independence happened, Mahalanobis, at a very young age, roughly at the same age that Bhabha started TIFR 2 decades later, Mahalanobis at similar age had started in partnership with few friends, the Indian Statistical in ISI in Calcutta. And sometimes I wonder whether Bhabha also drew his inspiration to create TIFR from the pioneering work done by Mahalanobis himself. So let me conclude and not preempt anymore the talk of Professor Partha Majumder. And we are very happy that one of the presidents of the Science Academy is giving the talk today, and the other president of the Science Society of the Indian Academy of Sciences is our guest of honor. So thank you very much, both of you, and welcome to SPSTI Forum. Back to you, Kia.
Thank you, Professor Grover. It is now my turn to call upon Professor K.P. Singh of IISER Mohali to introduce the guest of honor. Professor K.P. Singh is very well known as a laser physicist, and he's also adept at public outreach. Professor K.P. Singh, please introduce Professor Ram. You are muted, K.P. Singh. Yeah.
All right. So first of all, thank you very much, ma'am, for this nice opportunity. And because there is degeneracy in names and so on, so I did not prepare any formal introduction. So I'll just speak about what I had experienced with him and so on. So it is a great pleasure to be a student of Professor Ramaswamy, and he has known me since my MSc days in 2000. That was about 22 years back. And I still have actually vivid memories of him teaching us classical mechanics on board, and also giving us a lot of interesting projects, in particular experimental projects on diffusion limited aggregation. So these are the small particles, you apply voltage and they make very nice patterns and so on. And one of the very interesting interaction I had with him was, I was living in Rajasthan with my parents at that time. And from some rocks, I bought a sample, and enthusiastically, I told him, it looks like what you taught us in class. And he was very excited. And he said, yeah, this is exactly how they are formed in nature and so on. So I think it was a very wonderful thing. And after my MSc, I left JNU and I touched his feet. And he was at that time not very happy because I was leaving country. But I promised him that I'll come back. And after 10 years, I came back and we had several interactions and so on. So this is just my part of the story. But over past so many years, I'm sure he has trained hundreds of students like me who had absolutely zero background who even couldn't speak properly English, coming from rural backgrounds and so on. And now they are all actually trying to do their best in their respective fields. So that is actually the one of the greatest contribution from my perspective. And in all of my interaction with him, he has extremely positive energy. And it actually fills with enthusiasm, and it's actually a great honor to speak to him and to be in touch with him. And research-wise, actually, he has a Wikipedia page and Google Scholar, etc. So everybody can look at his great contributions. And I'm very happy to listen to him again of his experience. And with this, I would like to I would actually request you to please take the mic.
Thank you, Professor K.P. Singh. A very interesting introduction indeed. And now I request Professor Ramaswamy to start his address. Ram.
Thank you, K.R. Dharamveer and Arun and all friends for asking me to be here today. It's a distinct honor to share the podium with Partha and also to actually the series that you have on the foundation of institutions. Actually, it's interesting that you had K.P. Singh, as in Kamal Priya Singh, introduce me. Or not introduce me. Thank you, Kamal. But because he was a student at JNU in the school of, when we were in the School of Physical Sciences. And one of the things that I remember an old previous colleague of mine telling me about when we were starting SPS in 1986 was that it is a sad truth about India that the half-life of any institution seems to be about 25 years. So it takes 25 years for an institute to grow to some size, and after that it is all the way downhill. And it is nice, therefore, to actually listen to the history of an institution that has defied this norm. The ISI is famously one of the most successful institutions that we have. There are others also that have defied the 25-year-old norm, but unfortunately, the School of Physical Sciences and JNU arguably have not. But you know, to know the greatness of institutions like the JNU, the final comments of Kamal, where special efforts were taken to reach out to students who might not otherwise have had the opportunity to do research. And it is a testimony to the firmness of that idea and the vision that was there in the foundation of an institution like JNU, that so many of the JNU graduates, not just in history, which is expected, or economics, which is also expected, but also so many physics institutes all have people who have either done their PhD at JNU or done their masters at JNU, many more of the latter, obviously. So to the ISI, it is a remarkable institution in so many ways. First of all, for the resilience that it has shown over, near a century of existence. It's also shown remarkable inventiveness because of the number of people, especially the number of fine statisticians and mathematicians that have come from it. And as Arun gave in this, you should have said spoiler alert, Arun, as you were going on, because there's so many features of the ISI really, which it would be lovely to hear Partha talk a little more about them directly. Okay, the final thing that I do want to say is that there is really no need for institutions in India to have such fragility. In examples like the ISI, the reinvented IISc, or the reinventing TIFR, because all of these, in order to survive beyond a certain age, do need to reinvent themselves, but they also need to document it. And, as I see Sati on the screen right now, I do remember that at some point in time, the directors of the first 5 IISERs got together to write down their experiences. And I understand from the conversation earlier today that there is a book on the ISI being planned, or at least being contemplated. I think it's extremely important to write down what actually went right, maybe more importantly to write down what didn't go right, and what are the things that a person can avoid, or how does one make an institution which is really so remarkable. Like all of you, we are anxious to hear, especially the view from within. Partha, as one of the leading lights of ISI, I hope you don't mind my calling you that, Partha, but certainly one of the most successful scientists who has spanned various different areas and built a very fine institute, which is sort of cognate or related very closely in many ways to the ISI. I think it would be useful to hear his insights and to learn what are all the right things that they did. So it's a pleasure to share the podium with you, Partha, and I'm greatly looking forward to your talk.
Thanks, Ram.
Thank you very much, Professor Ramaswamy. And now it is my turn to call upon the next introducer, also from IISER Mohali, Professor N.G. Prasad, to introduce today's speaker. Professor Prasad himself has been closely associated with institute building, that is IISER Mohali. He has been here almost right from the beginning and has been wearing many hats. So Professor Prasad, please go ahead.
you. I should thank all the organizers for, first of all, organizing this wonderful series and sustaining it week after week, and for inviting all of us to be part of it. Thank you. It's a great pleasure and honor to introduce Professor Partha Majumder, or PPM as we used to call him as students. He is one of the most accomplished and distinguished scientists of this country. He started out in ISI, so he's the right person to speak about ISI, did his bachelor's, master's, and PhD working on ABO blood group gene frequencies in Indian subcontinent, populations of the Indian subcontinent at ISI. Went on to do his postdoc from the Center for Demographic and Population Genetic Studies at the University of Texas. Then came back to ISI, became a lecturer, then grew within the institution, and finally became the head and the professor at the Human Genetics Unit at ISI. He's also worn many other hats, ones of leadership that has made him an institute builder also. He's been an honorary director of TCG ISI Center for Population Genomics at Calcutta. More importantly, in 2010, he was given the responsibility of establishing a whole new institution. He was appointed the founding director of the National Institute of Biomedical Genomics, a beautiful, very important institute in a beautiful 30-acre campus near Kalyani. Yeah, this institute has been established as an autonomous institution by the Government of India under Department of Biotechnology. It is the first institution in India which is explicitly devoted to research, training, and capacity building in biomedical genomics. And as the founding director, he has done a lot for the success of this institution. He has received a large number of honors. He's the honorary professor at many places. For us at IISER Mohali, we are very happy to have him as an honorary professor. He's also an honorary professor at IISER Kolkata, JNCSR Bangalore, University of Pittsburgh. The list is very long. He's the fellow of all three science academies of India. He's been the president of the Indian Academy of Sciences. He's the fellow of the World Academy of Sciences. He's an elected member of the International Statistical Institute, a member of the Council of the Human Genome Organization. Again, a very long list. He's won numerous awards, including the G.D. Birla Award, the World Academy of Sciences Prize in Biology, the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Society of Biotechnologists. He's a J.C. Bose Fellow. He has served Indian science in many different capacities also. He's been on the editorial board of many journals, including Genome Biology and Evolution, Human Genetics, our own Journal of Biosciences, and Sankhya, which is the Indian Journal of Statistics. He has been an advisor to the Government of India in many capacities. He has worked closely with the Office of the Principal Scientific Advisor to the Government of India. He has been an advisor to many departments like DBT, DST, ICMR, CSIR. He has also represented India as Indian representative on many international fora. And just as an example, he has been the representative of the Government of India on the Global Alliance for Global Health. He has served at UNESCO as the genomics expert on the drafting group on the International Declaration of Human Genetic Data. Many services to science in general. As far as research is concerned, it's very rich, huge body of research. One could argue that the connecting thread among all this is human genetics, genomics, statistical genetics, population genetics, a huge body of work. Just to mention 2-3 major lines of work, he has worked at gaining a deeper understanding of the relative roles of common versus rare variants in genetic diseases. He's also worked on estimating correctly the polygenic risk scores by looking at appropriate population-based genome-wide association studies. He's worked at identifying various markers in relation to cancer, be it single nucleotide polymorphisms, copy numbers, or also looking at dysregulation of gene expression using RNA sequencing data in relation to cancer. My most vivid memory of Professor Partha,
Sir, you are muted. Please unmute again.
Sorry. Am I audible now? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So my most vivid memory of Professor Majumder is very, very relevant to today's talk. Professor Majumder probably does not remember this. I visited ISI as a student about 20 years ago. Went and met him in his group. He was very gracious. Sat down, talked, explained, made me meet many other people in his group. Then he decided to give me a tour of ISI. I remember that there is a house, apparently where Mahalanobis used to live. He took me there. There is a hall which had sofas cordoned off by a rope. He stood, showed me those places and said, you know, this is where Mahalanobis used to sit with Haldane and Fisher, and they used to have discussions. And his description was so vivid, so energetic. You know, I could almost feel the presence of all these greats. And having studied genetics, this was a fantastic experience to me, and it still remains to me with me till today. And I hope to relive those experiences in today's talk. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Prasad. A very lively introduction. And I can see that you were getting breathless reading out that long list of distinctions. So we are very happy today to have you with us, Professor Majumder. And I now invite you to present your talk.
Thank you very much. I'm really honored to be called upon to give this talk. As many of you are aware, and as Professor Prasad has mentioned, I actually grew up in ISI, so it's my umbilical cord is, so to say, tied to ISI. Many of you may be expecting that I'll talk about the Indian Statistical Institute. I'll only talk about the Indian Statistical Institute in passing, because today I'm going to focus on Prasanta Chandra Mahalanobis. Of course, he created the Indian Statistical Institute. I have my own analysis of the kind that Ram was mentioning, but I'm not going to get into that. There are two other things that I shall not get into. Professor T.V.Ramakrishnan mentioned about his Mahalanobis' relationship with Rabindranath Tagore, and that's a separate talk by itself, and I'm not going to touch upon that, even though I'm going to make a few remarks. The third thing that I'm not going to do, again, that's an episode, deserves a full lecture, which is the relationship between Bhabha and Mahalanobis. I will again have one slide where I'll make, 2-sentence comments, but that's about it, because these are all standard. These would be all standalone talks, and today my focus is essentially on Mahalanobis, his contributions to science and his contributions to nation building. So I'll share my screen and start. And again, let me express my deepest gratitude to all of you, in particular to Professor Arun Grover, who many months ago, called me up and said that I should give such a talk. Wasn't sure, what talk I was going to give, but over this period of months, when I proposed to him that I give this talk and he kindly agreed, I'm actually very happy to give this talk, and I feel very honored and delighted. Let me share my screen are you able to see my screen?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. I'm trying to make it full screen. Is it full screen now?
Yes.
Excellent. All right. So I have titled my talk as Mahalanobis, an architect of statistical science and of our national development. And I'll touch upon both aspects: his own contributions, building of statistical science, not just in India, but globally, his major contributions to statistical science, and his contributions to our national development. Mahalanobis, who was born in 1893 and passed away in 1972, I have been fortunate to have, he had taken a few lectures for us, not a formal course, so I know, how he teaches and the kind of thought processes that go through him. But again, my interaction with him was so minimal that I'm not going to get into that particular aspect. Most of what I'm going to talk to you about is through my interest in history of science and reading Mahalanobis's papers and what's been written on him by others. He certainly was a firm believer that scientific and rational views lay the foundations of modern age. And he made a statement, and this is from one of his writings, that the transformation of all advanced or rapidly advancing countries has been brought about by the acceptance of a scientific and rational view of life and nature. This is the foundation of modern age. So that's what Mahalanobis believed, and I guess that we all should firmly believe in this particular thought, that scientific and rational views lay the foundations of modern age. Prasanta Chandra Mahalanobis, as all of us know, founded the Indian Statistical Institute. If he did nothing else, his name would be etched in the annals of science. But he did many more, and I'm going to describe more facts about him, more of his contributions, both in nation building and in science. When the Indian Statistical Institute was established, and that was in 1931, there was no institution of statistics in a country even like the United States of America. The first institute in the United States was Institute of Statistics in the United States was built in North Carolina, and it was after ISI was adopted as a model for the first Institute of Statistics that was established in the US at the Research Triangle Park in North Carolina by Mary Cox. And I.G. Patel, in this book, Glimpses of Indian Economic Policy, and we'll meet with I.G. Patel through my talk a few more times. He mentioned in this talk, and he visited ISI many times, and he said about ISI that it resembled an ancient Gurukul set in sylvan surroundings. It's very green. ISI campus is quite green. Although over a period of time, more buildings came up and the greenery is lost for those of us who have been associated with ISI for many years, for many decades. And he went on to say that it's a cocktail of disarming hospitality. Mrs. Mahalanobis was, laid out that hospitality, famed intellects and erudite debate amidst a context of national importance. And again, we'll meet I.G. Patel through my talk many times, and we'll talk about nation building and various aspects of national importance that he and others, Mahalanobis and others, impacted on. His encounter with statistics was by chance. Some of it was mentioned by Professor Grover, but again, it doesn't hurt to repeat that. In 1912, he passed his BSc with honors in physics from Presidency College and left for England to study at the King's College in Cambridge. 1915, he completed his tripos. He was to go back to do his PhD with C.T.R. Wilson of Cloud Chamber fame. He returned home for a short vacation and wasn't able to go back and never returned. The war intervened. He was asked to teach physics at the Presidency College, which he undertook, and became a professor eventually of physics in 1922 and served in the Presidency College until 1948. The Indian Statistical Institute was established in 1931. So as you can see that as he was establishing the Indian Statistical Institute, he continued to be a professor at the Presidency College. The way that he learned statistics was, like I said, was by chance. And just before he was leaving Cambridge for Calcutta, one of his tutors in King's College, Macaulay, drew his attention to Biometrica. Biometrica was the first journal, this first statistical journal in the world. And it was primarily meant to provide research and provide the results of research on quantitative biology using statistical methods, and much of statistical methods grew after various kinds of papers were published in Biometrica. It was edited by two people, Weldon and Carl Pearson, and we'll meet Carl Pearson again through my talk. Mahalanobis, that particular issue that was given to Mahalanobis by his tutor Macaulay, Mahalanobis found some of the papers rather interesting and decided that he'll buy the whole set of volumes of Biometrica because his voyage to India would take about 3 months, and therefore he had ample time to read the various volumes of Biometrica, which he did, and that was his introduction to statistics. He set up the statistical laboratory within the Department of Physics in Presidency College. The room still exists. On his centenary, some of us went to take a picture of that room. Was very difficult, but we did find some of the banners and posters that were there in the, announcing the statistical laboratory in the Presidency College. As I said, in 1931, he established the Indian Statistical Institute. His first encounter, and I'm so glad that Professor Grover mentioned about Acharya Brajendranath Seal. Not many people know of him. He was a professor of philosophy in Calcutta University, a chair professor of philosophy in Calcutta University, was an erudite person, was also the registrar, and at that time, he was trying to figure out whether through the marks that were obtained by students of Calcutta University, in examination marks, he was trying to figure out whether the quality of teaching was improving over a period of time or not. He, of course, did not know much of statistics, and therefore he assigned this work to Mahalanobis, and this was the first work that Mahalanobis had done, essentially to do a statistical analysis of the marks obtained by students in various examinations of the Calcutta University. Acharya Brajendranath Seal then went on to become a Vice-Chancellor of Madras University at a later point of time. Mahalanobis was greatly influenced by Rabindranath Tagore. His first meeting with Rabindranath was in 1910, and that was his first direct interaction with Rabindranath. And he wrote to his wife Nirmal Kumari in 1916 that his life was rekindled by the touch of Rabindranath. And subsequently, of course, they traveled together. Mahalanobis was the first secretary of Vishwabharati. He actually drafted the constitution of Vishwabharati and so on. So, and Mahalanobis also went on to say that his introduction to Rabindranath's writings were almost simultaneous with his introduction to the alphabets. Like I just said, that he drafted the constitution of Vishwabharati. He was the first secretary jointly with Rabindranath's son, Rothindranath Tagore, the first joint secretary, they called Karma Sachiv, of Vishwabharati, and of course did very many things with Rabindranath, and he was inspired by Rabindranath. And one of the things that Mahalanobis was inspired by, he wrote this letter in Bengali to his wife, Rani Mahalanobis. Nirmal Kumari Mahalanobis was the formal name, but everybody knew her as Rani Mahalanobis or called her as Rani Mahalanobis. And he wrote, and this is a Bengali letter, and I have written about the relationship between Mahalanobis and Rabindranath. At that time, I rummaged through various archives at the IISER, and I found this letter, and this translation was done by me, and you will meet some more translations as I go along. And he wrote to his wife, "I cannot see anyone enthusiastic about the poet's repeated appeal for a global union. Rabindranath was pleading for a global union at that time, was visiting various countries, and Mahalanobis could not see anybody who was enthusiastic about the for a global union. I don't know about other matters, but in the matter of unity of races, which again Rabindranath Tagore was trying to promote, unity of races, perhaps the poet's ideal will never be established in Vishwabharati in spite of his efforts. As you know, that Vishwabharati was home to very many people from various parts of the world, including China and other such places, and many people came and spent time and taught, learned. So it was really a global union. It was a global, like the name suggests, Vishwabharati. It was really globalization of learning and unity of races, but Mahalanobis felt that is people were not enthusiastic, and that's probably not going to happen. I'm going to skip that. What for reasons that I shall not, I first of all don't know this very much, but the little that I know is that he and Rothindranath, Rabindranath's son, they were the joint secretaries of first secretaries of Vishwabharati, and they didn't go along very well. After a certain time, their certain period of time of working together, their relationship sort of soured, and Chandra resigned from Vishwabharati in 1929. Rothindranath later, in 1931, wrote to Prasanta Chandra, Rabindranath and Vishwabharati are two different entities. By differentiating them, Prasanta Chandra derives great pleasure. So, between the lines, if we read this, they obviously had differences of opinion on how Vishwabharati should be set up. Rabindranath was, of course, Rabindranath's son, and Prasanta Chandra was very close to Rabindranath. Both of them had access to Rabindranath. But again, I think that they had differences of opinion about how Vishwabharati should function, how Vishwabharati should be set up, and Mahalanobis decided to resign from Vishwabharati in 1929. The Indian Statistical Institute was born in 1931, as I said, and he probably was seeking emancipation by creating his own institution. This is, of course, speculation, but there were certain reasons why I make this statement, and I don't have the time to expand on the reasons why I've made the statement. Mahalanobis is most famous for, his name is associated with a statistic known as d-squared statistic. And I mean, this is in the realm of multivariate analysis, which is the domain of statistics. If Mahalanobis did nothing else, again, his name would be in, his contribution to science would be etched in stone, and Mahalanobis d-squared is something that is a lasting contribution of Mahalanobis to multivariate analysis. The history of development of d-squared statistic is also quite interesting. In 1920, the Indian Science Congress was held in Nagpur, and the director at that time of the Zoological Survey of India was Nelson Annandale. At that time, there was no separate Anthropological Survey of India. It was Zoological and Anthropological Survey of India. So Nelson Annandale was interested in these various communities that are there in India, and he was in particular interested about the Anglo-Indians of Calcutta, who were products, biological products of people of European ancestry versus people of Indian ancestry. What he was interested in figuring out is, can we try and identify the extent of contribution of people of European ancestry compared to the Indian ancestry in the biological production of the Anglo-Indians of India. And of course, there was a large crowd of Anglo-Indians in Calcutta, and Mahalanobis set about trying to answer that question using body dimensions, physical dimensions, because the father and mother's physical dimensions in some ways mirror in the child, and therefore he was studying the children, and he had data from both Europeans and Indians, and he was trying to understand the relative components of European ancestry and Indian ancestry among the Anglo-Indians of Calcutta. Was he successful? I'll give you the upshot right away, which is that it was not a successful endeavor. But as a result of these kinds of studies, quantitative studies on body dimensions and trying to understand the relationship of one group with two other ancestral groups, the d-squared statistic evolved. When he was trying to do this in England, Carl Pearson, whom we have met, he was the first editor of Biometrica. Carl Pearson was actually doing some studies on trying to understand racial likeness, in other words, racial differences and racial similarities between various kinds of races, including, at that time, England was ruling half of the world anyway. So there were various races that were represented under the sort of what England was ruling, and he was trying to understand the relationship among these various races, and he devised a measure called measure of racial likeness, measure called the coefficient of racial likeness, and had applied those results on using skull dimensions and so on and so forth. So as long as you had quantitative biological data, you could use such coefficients, such as the coefficient of racial likeness, in order to understand racial differences or measure racial differences. Mahalanobis wanted to use the coefficient of racial likeness when he undertook studies in India, in particular of the Anglo-Indians, and later two other major surveys that he undertook. As he tried to look at the properties of the coefficient of racial likeness, he became completely disillusioned. One of the reasons, and he made the statement that the coefficient of racial likeness, which Carl Pearson denoted as C-squared, was actually a test of divergence between two samples rather than a measure of actual magnitude of divergence. Let me explain this a little bit. So when you're trying to measure the innate difference between two population groups, let's say two racial groups, don't like to use the word race, but two racial groups, let's say, you're not able to study every individual in each of the two races. So you draw a sample, And based on the measurements of the sample, you try and draw inferences about the population, the innate characteristic, the innate similarity between the two populations. And if you have a reasonably representative sample of a reasonable size, your inference about the innate intrinsic similarity or difference should be estimated quite well. And that's what they were looking for in this coefficient of racial likeness or any other coefficient. Mahalanobis studied the properties of this CRL and found that as you increase the sample size from each of the two groups or even one group, the value of the coefficient of racial likeness kept increasing. Now, you were trying to measure some intrinsic relationship between two races, and if you increase the sample size, what one would expect is that the estimate would become better and better. But after a certain stage, it should not keep on increasing because, after all, there is some intrinsic relationship between the two groups, and it just cannot keep increasing as you increase the sample size. So he was quite dissatisfied with this particular measure of racial likeness, and so he went on to develop his own measure, which is known as D squared. I'm not going to give you the formula, which will increase with the sample size, but will become an asymptote or will stabilize after a period of time. After that, even if you increase the sample size, the value of D squared will not increase, and that's precisely what one expects. And that particular stable value of D squared is what one would that would be the estimate of the intrinsic difference between the two races or the two population groups that you're looking at. He applied this in a study called Analysis of Race Mixture in Bengal, and I'll talk about this in a little bit more detail as I go along. In 1930, he published the paper, which he titled as On Tests and Measures of Group Divergence. And like I said, that he would be remembered, even if he didn't contribute anything else to science, he would be remembered for D squared statistic, which bears his name, which is called Mahalanobis D squared. It's used in measurement of differences between any two populations. This could be populations of inanimate objects, like two groups of screws produced by two machines, could be like rainfall in a particular place and rainfall in another place, whatever. Any time you have some kind of multi-dimensional observations, you could use D squared to measure some intrinsic differences and similarities between the two groups. This was published in 1930, and on the 125th birth anniversary of Mahalanobis, I was actually doing some research on Mahalanobis at that point of time, and prior. I stumbled across a letter and a historical note that he actually sent this paper to Carl Pearson in 1929 for publication in Biometrica, and Carl Pearson actually rejected that particular manuscript, and it was eventually published in the Journal of Asiatic Society of Bengal. Today it's called the Asiatic Society. At that time it was called the Asiatic Society of Bengal. Without any argument whatsoever, the paper that has the highest number of citations ever in any article that was published in the Journal of the Asiatic Society, this is the paper that carries the maximum number of citations ever till today. So in some ways, Mahalanobis really made a mark by publishing it in the Journal of Asiatic Society, because it was Carl Pearson did not accept to publish it in Biometrica. Mahalanobis then went on to apply this particular statistic to various other population surveys. He actually came in contact with an anthropologist by name D.N. Majumder, and D.N. Majumder had some questions. Already the sociologists, the social anthropologists had some notion about the hierarchy of Indian populations, Indian communities, and castes and tribal populations. And what D.N. Majumder had, in talking to Mahalanobis, wanted to find out whether body dimensions and the social hierarchy that sociologists and social anthropologists have construed, did they jive well? Did they go hand in hand? Did they correlate? Mahalanobis actually wanted to use D squared statistic in order to find the relationship or the relationships among these populations based on body dimensions, and then tried to figure out whether that associated well, or that was in coordination with what the sociologists and social anthropologists had claimed. So in this anthropometric survey of the United Provinces, Uttar Pradesh and that region, they had selected various groups, 2 Brahmin groups, 4 artisan groups, and 8 tribal groups. And these are, as you know, at different levels of social hierarchy. And then there were certain groups that the social sociologists had claimed to be the product of, to be admixed between the Brahmin groups and the artisan groups, the Chatris, the Muslims, and the Agarias. Chamars were claimed to be product of mating between artisan groups and tribal groups. And then there were a number of groups whose origins or ancestries were not known. And those are the names of the groups. So Mahalanobis actually took samples from each of these groups along with the help of D.N. Majumder, and at that time C.R. Rao, the oldest living statistician in the world today, a very, very famous fellow of the Royal Society, winner of the US National Medal of Science, and so on. So C.R. Rao was a student of Mahalanobis, and at that time they worked together on this. And essentially, they found that among the groups forming the main sequence, there is a close correspondence between social status and resemblance to Brahmins. Socially, whatever the social anthropologists had claimed, if they claimed that this group was farther from Brahmin group compared to another group which is closer, it seemed like from the body dimensions they were able to recapitulate that. But they also found a large number of cases, a fair number of cases, in which physical evidence definitely indicates possible origins contrary to accepted opinion. So these were the 2 major findings of the UP anthropometry survey. Went on to repeat the survey in undivided Bengal in 1945. This is called the Bengal Anthropometry Survey. At that time, this word race was being misused quite a bit, and Mahalanobis was acutely aware of that. And in Bengal Anthropometry Survey, therefore, they adopted a neutral word and called these as groups, as opposed to castes or tribes and races. And he actually defined a group consists of individuals belonging to the same caste, religion, or tribe and living in the same district. So essentially, the group, they sampled groups, or they sampled individuals from various groups and tried to reconstruct ancestries and similarities among these groups. What they found, again, I'm not going to go into the details of the findings, but these were some important findings. What they found was that within a social group, there was considerable amount of regional differences. So, for example, if you took a Brahmin or 2 Brahmins who lived in the same in geographical proximity versus 2 Brahmins who lived in very far apart, the 2 Brahmins who lived in geographical proximity would be close, but the Brahmin who lived in a geographically distant place would be closer to somebody who was living in that place as opposed to the Brahmins, the 2 Brahmins who were living far away. So essentially, for many of these body dimensions, geographical proximity was a better explanatory variable than social hierarchy. So he went on to say that the Brahmins of Bengal, as a phrase, has to be used with some caution, because all Brahmins of Bengal are really not as close as one would think that they were. Another interesting feature is that sometimes there is closer resemblance between caste groups within a district than between individuals of the same caste group belonging to different districts, which is what I said just now. So geographical proximity seems to be a better explanatory variable of the similarity in body dimensions as opposed to social belonging or social position. Well, Mahalanobis did these 2 major studies, along with, of course, C.R. Rao as his main collaborator, and D.N. Majumder. But he was quite disillusioned at the end, because of what he sought out to find, like the ancestries, like the similarities, there was a lot of variability in body dimensions, in data on body dimension, because body dimensions are impacted on by the environment, and therefore he concluded that anthropometry alone cannot tell the tale. We have to supplement by other physical, genetic, and serological data. The Indian Statistical Institute, after he made this prophetic statement, I think it is a prophetic statement really, that based on his analysis, he would be able to contemplate that you could do a better job using serological data such as blood group data or genetic data. The Indian Statistical Institute set up a hematology unit, which subsequently graduated to an anthropometry and human genetics unit, and then subsequently to a human genetics unit. I'm a beneficiary of this particular statement that Mahalanobis has made, and first 30 years of my professional career, this is what I did, and I'm not going to explain any more on this particular aspect of Mahalanobis. So that's what he did. That was it was by chance that he got into examining the properties of the coefficient of racial likeness, and then propounded D square and derived its properties, used them, and so on and so forth. He was also engaged in flood research for a long period of time, and his initiation into flood research was primarily because Government of India asked him to look at certain aspects of floods, and there were two disastrous floods, one in North Bengal in 1922 and one in Orissa in 1926. What Mahalanobis did was Mahalanobis was a completely data-driven person. So what he did was to look at the amount of rainfall in the catchment areas of these places where there were these floods or along the banks of the river, and analyzed those, modeled those, and came to certain kinds of conclusions that were completely orthogonal to the conclusions that engineers were suggesting. So the engineers were suggesting that the best way to control floods would be to raise the embankments of the rivers, the major rivers, Mahanadi and the Brahmaputra, etc., in Ganges and Brahmaputra in Bengal. So the engineers suggested that we should raise the embankments of the rivers. Mahalanobis, based on his analysis of 50 years of data, actually came to another completely different conclusion. He essentially said that raising embankments won't do, because there's going to be siltation over a period of time, and it will overflow the embankments. The rivers will overflow the embankments even if you raise the embankment. So that's not a solution. What he said is that you have to improve the drainage, you have to desilt these rivers, and it has to be done on a regular basis. He also came up with, desilting a river, a very long river is not an easy idea. So he also had some other solutions to avoid siltation, and his calculations and the various kinds of data that he provided, data and inferences from the modeling that he provided, formed the basis of Hirakud Dam hydroelectric project and the Damodar Valley Corporation project. So that was his foray into flood research. Again, the reason why I'm mentioning this is that based on statistical analysis of data, he came to a conclusion that was completely at variance with what engineers had said. He contributed largely to large-scale sample surveys. He was, like I said, that he was an architect of modern statistical science, and this is one major contribution that he made to modern medical science, modern statistical science. If you're trying to understand properties of a bunch of individuals belonging to a population, most of the time you wouldn't have the time and money to measure every individual in the population. So you have to try and estimate properties of the population based on samples, but the sample has to be representative. And the way that you would try and draw a sample, a population can also be stratified. There may be some tall people, short people, rich people, poor people, and so on. So to draw a representative sample from a population is not an easy chore. And unless the population sample is representative of the population, your inferences from the sample will not be good estimates of the population characteristics. So Mahalanobis devised various kinds of sampling schemes under various scenarios of stratification and other kinds of properties of the population. He also, and as many of you would know, that in order to even to estimate what is the sample size required, such that you're trying to test a hypothesis, what is the sample size required so that you have so much of statistical power. To do that, you would need to make the statistical calculation of sample size requirement. You would need to get an idea of the amount of standard deviation that there is for the characteristic for which you're trying to test the hypothesis. And how would you get an idea of the characteristic? Mahalanobis device based. Now it seems that it's obvious that that's exactly what you should be doing. He said that do a pilot survey estimate, and based on those estimates of the pilot survey, then go ahead and do your sample size calculations or whatever else you need, and form the next major survey and the sampling design. This concept was later used in what's called sequential analysis that was developed by Abraham Wald later, and sequential analysis is a strong domain of statistics right now. He also devised another method called interpenetrating network of subsamples, which is a built-in method for validation. Oftentimes we make discoveries, but unless we validate the discoveries, obviously we are never sure, because the discoveries are fraught with error oftentimes. And could we have a method where you are discovering and simultaneously you're able to at least have a built-in method of validation? And this interpenetrating network of subsamples that he had proposed was a method where there was this built-in cross-checking and validation. Mahalanobis wrote this long paper, encompassing all of his ideas on large-scale sample surveys. This is a paper that's about 112 pages long. All of us know what the format of the philosophical transactions of the Royal Society. It's a large, almost an A4 size format, 112-page paper. This was published in 1944. He was awarded a fellowship of the Royal Society in 1945 for his outstanding contributions to statistics, particularly in the field of large-scale sample surveys. So this was the paper where that actually made him, or actually awarded, the Royal Society awarded him a fellowship. This paper was communicated to the Philosophical Transactions by Ronald Fisher, himself a fellow of the Royal Society. Of course, lots of good things have been said about Mahalanobis' contributions in large-scale sample surveys. Harold Hotelling, who is again a very famous statistician, stated that no technique of random sampling has, so far as I can find, been developed in the United States or elsewhere, which can compare in accuracy with that described by Professor Mahalanobis. As a result of his contributions to large-scale sample surveys, he was elected as the chairman of the United Nations Subcommission on Statistical Sampling, and this subcommission eventually poured out the methodologies of survey sampling and large-scale sample surveys to other parts of the world, and sample surveys have become completely embedded in the fabric of every nation that relies on quantitative data for policy planning. He was also a meteorologist from 1922 to 1926, a formal meteorologist of the Alipur Observatory in Calcutta. Wherever he went, he had something to contribute. I've mentioned about flood research, which is not his domain. Here also, when he became when he was selected as the meteorologist of the Alipur Observatory, the most famous British meteorologist, William Dines, he had proposed that in order to understand what happens on the surface of the Earth, we have to study beyond the surface of the Earth. And he sent out balloons during ascent. That balloon collected data. During descent, the balloon collected data, etc. And so based on data that Dines had collected, he concluded that pressure at a height of 9 kilometers was the seat of all activity, and we needed to understand what happens in the base of the stratosphere. 9 kilometers is really the base of the stratosphere, in order to understand the climatological activities on the surface of the Earth. That would be sufficient for making predictions if you studied 9 kilometers above the surface of the Earth. 9 kilometers above the surface of the Earth is not an easy place to collect data from. Anyway, based on the data that Dines had collected, Mahalanobis concluded something completely different. He published this paper in Nature, and Mahalanobis used the same data that Dines had shared with him, and found out that the highest correlation was at a much lower atmospheric level, between 2 and 4 kilometers, and that the correlation with the climatological variables on the surface of the Earth was much better than the correlation at 9 kilometers. Now, one of the reasons why this happened, you're drawing a completely different conclusion from the same set of data. The reason why this happened is that there was serial correlation as this balloon was collecting data and was going up to the stratosphere. It was collecting data, but the data were serially correlated. And Dines assumed that these were independent data and actually analyzed the data using, assuming that these were independent data without taking the serial correlation into account. And Mahalanobis essentially took the serial correlation into account, corrected the mistakes in the data set, and came to this conclusion. Now, Stephen Stigler, who is again a very famous living statistician, says that this is most impressive work. It was correct, effectively and confidently written. Remember, Mahalanobis had nothing to do with methodology. So it was effectively and confidently written and judicious in avoiding overstatement. Wherever Mahalanobis went, there was a touch of innovation, there was a touch of originality. And so when J.K. Ghosh, a teacher of mine, no more, and I wrote a biographical piece in the Encyclopedia of Biostatistics of Mahalanobis. This is the sentence that we ended with: innovation, systematization, and concrete applications are the hallmarks of the kind of applied statistics practiced by Mahalanobis. So he was an original thinker and innovator, and wherever he went, he left his footprint. I'm now going to move over and talk about the second part of my talk, which is on national development. And it's instructive to understand what the trust deed of the Mahalanobis trust reads. And this was, he had set up a trust, and the trust deed essentially says that the trust was formed to promote the advancement of knowledge of statistics and other branches for national and social sciences and technology, and I've highlighted for national development of India and welfare of the people of India. And he also, and we have heard the second statement many times when we were students, statistics must have a clearly defined purpose, one aspect of which is scientific advance and the other human welfare and national development. So he sincerely believed that statistical science could be used for national development, and I'm going to narrate to you some of the things that he did in terms of planning for national development. At that time, there was no planning commission. This is 1940s. There was no planning commission, but there was a national planning committee. This was still the British Raj, the National Planning Committee. And in 1940, Nehru, who was heading the planning committee, asked Mahalanobis to prepare a statistical commentary on the National Planning Committee reports. The National Planning Committee, over a period of time, had collected data, had prepared reports. So Mahalanobis went ahead and analyzed those collected data statistically and made some very useful observations, which eventually was the reason why in 1945, Mahalanobis, instead of Nehru, was appointed as the chairman of the National Income Committee. The National Planning Committee, of course, had a lot of income data. And at that time, the National Planning Committee was being folded, and Mahalanobis was made the chairman of the National Income Committee. One would imagine that the National Income Committee would be chaired by an economist, but Mahalanobis was by no stretch of imagination an economist. He was a physicist turned statistician. So he said that and the National Income Committee was the forerunner of the Planning Commission later, and Mahalanobis said that he had only vague ideas of planning. From 1950, when I first started handling national income data, I began to learn, and this is what he wrote to Pitambar Pant on 24 June 1954. And then he goes on to say, and in the same letter, Mahalanobis writes to Pant, to be quite frank, I'm so ignorant about academic economics, and my Indian colleagues have been so cocksure about their own infallibility that I had a little bit of inferiority complex about economic matters. This is when he started thinking about national income, thinking about economic planning, and so on. As his biographer Ashok Rudra would later note, he was highly distrustful of professional economists and openly declared total disregard for theoretical economics. This essentially means that he was very data-driven, and some of the theoretical economists were, constructing models based on some thought experiments, so to say, rather than data-driven. And he was he wouldn't take that. He has no tolerance for that. He took the first planning. India's first plan was already made and was and had been implemented. The second plan was being thought. Second 5-year plan was being thought through. Mahalanobis was requested by the government, to formulate the second 5-year plan, and Mahalanobis took an unconventional approach to planning. And that unconventional approach actually found the first supporter was John Robinson. Later, it found support in many people, notable economists. But John Robinson, I might mention, was Amartya Sen's PhD advisor. What was the unconventional approach that he took? This is the unconventional approach that he took. He divided the Indian economy into 4 sectors: investment goods industries, factories, consumer goods industries, etc. And you can read it. This was not the kind of approach that planners would take. They wouldn't think about the society as being or the economy of a country, a national economy, to be divided like this into 4 sectors. But he actually set it up in 4 sectors, and he said that each sector must have a target. And so he set targets for each sector. Now, to meet that target, you would need some investment. So there was this total investment. There were targets for each sector, and he set up. He said that each sector must have a target, and that must be better than what had happened in the previous plan period. And so there was, the difference had to be met. That's the target. So he set up some equations. Turned out that the number of equations was smaller than the number of variables, and therefore you couldn't get a unique solution to the parameters, and therefore one had to make some constrained optimization. This constrained optimization is a mathematical enterprise. It's a part of what's called operations research. So in order to be able to do this at a major scale, at a large scale, he actually set up an operations research unit in the Indian Statistical Institute. He also took another unconventional approach, which is usually economists would say that if I want to set a target, or if I want to improve the economy, this is the amount of money that I would want to improve on. This is the additional amount of resources that I would like to build from that particular sector. But Mahalanobis said that, no, I'm not going to take a financial approach. I'm going to take a physical approach, and I'm going to ask, how many additional tons of coal am I going to produce in the second 5-year plan compared to the first 5-year plan? Not how much of money I'm going to accrue from mining of coal, but how many additional tons of coal that I'm going to work. So this physical planning approach was also unconventional, because all economists were used to a financial approach. Like I said, he set up an operational research unit in ISI, essentially to solve these various kinds of equations, and they were, like I said, you wouldn't get a unique solution, and therefore you had to play around. And the playing around was data-based, and these data were coming from the National Sample Survey Organization, which he had set up within the Indian Statistical Institute. It was coming from the Central Statistical Organization, again something that he set up, and this was in Delhi, that was collecting nationwide data, and the National Income Unit that had already become an integral part of the Indian Statistical Institute at that time. So he said in the House Journal of the Indian Statistical Institute that statistics without planning has no fruit, and planning without statistics has no root. So he believed that statistical science had to be used in planning the destiny of a nation. On March 17, 1955, P.C. Mahalanobis and I.G. Patel, I've mentioned about I.G. Patel before, I.G. Patel submitted the plan frame, and that was called Draft Recommendations for the Formulation of the Second 5-Year Plan. So this was March 17, 1955. On 23rd June 1955, the Times of India reported that this was the most significant document on Indian planning. And on 11th September 1955, Mahalanobis went on All India Radio to explain to the nation what the strategy that he had formulated in the plan frame would entail, or what was the strategy and how would it impact on the nation, on national development. He actually went on All India Radio and delivered a 15-minute address. J.V.S. Haldane, whom Professor Prasad has mentioned, J.V.S. Haldane renounced his British citizenship, came to Indian Statistical Institute and became an Indian citizen, and joined the Indian Statistical Institute and served the Indian Statistical Institute for a long time. J.V.S. Haldane said that even if one is pessimistic, there is a 50% chance for success of the plan frame, which will alter the whole history of the world for the better. Nehru called the second plan as the horoscope of Mother India, and he said it is based not on positions of the planets, but on circumstances of the country and the pulse of the people. This is Jawaharlal Nehru, first Prime Minister. What was done in the first 5-year plan, and I discuss this because I do want to discuss the impact of the second 5-year plan. The first 5-year plan was developed by K.N. Raj, who had studied again in England, came back to India. A 27-year-old boy came back to India, formulated India's first 5-year plan. At that time, India was going hungry. Citizens were going hungry. Reduction of hunger was the major thrust. The hunger was a fallout of the Second World War. It was exacerbated by the partition of India. There was food situation was dire, and the Grow More Food campaigns was going on. There was rising prices of food. Large amounts of food grains were being imported, and therefore agriculture had to be the priority of the first plan, which it was. And K.N. Raj, propounded the first 5-year plan. The question that we have in our minds is: was the second 5-year plan, as it was formulated, was that a thundering success? The one-word answer to that is no. And the reason why it was, and of course, the second 5-year plan emphasized heavy industry. They were going to build machines for building smaller machines, etc. And you needed investment for that. It had doubled public investment. It reduced investment in agriculture. It proposed increased public spending in industries that produce steel, machine tools, and chemicals, which is what they thought, what Mahalanobis and others had thought was important for India to sustain itself. Otherwise, we would be just importing steel forever. So this is what it was. And New York Times on 16th May 1956 reported that this was one of Asia's most important political and economic adventures. There was disdain for consumer industry. They were not going to build consumer industry very much. And in a recent book that Nikhil Menon has written called Planning Democracy, he says that at that time, the ethos was delaying consumer gratification was cast as a patriotic duty. And because there was no respect for consumer industry, Nehru himself said that you can't build future on Coca-Cola. He said this on the floor of the Rajya Sabha. You can't build the future of our nation on Coca-Cola. Many economists were euphoric about the second 5-year plan, and that included V.K.R.B. Rao, K.N. Raj himself, our architect of the first 5-year plan, Shukumar Chakraborty, Amartya Sen, Jagdish Bhagwati, all were euphoric. And these are just the Indian names, and I can rattle off a large number of foreign economists who were also euphoric about this. There were 3 people who were part of the planning commission at that time, and they were hypercritical about the second 5-year plan, Shenoy, Vakil, and Brahmananda. And they said that this was an anti-national strategy, and even called Mahalanobis as a CIA agent. Like I asked, was the second 5-year plan a thundering success? And the answer, one-word answer is no. And the reason why it was not a thundering success is because during the first 5-year plan, because of the hunger that prevailed, foreign exchange reserves were used to import food grains, and foreign exchange reserves were eaten up, were expended, most of it were used up. As a result of which, even though Mahalanobis said that we'll double public investment, that public investment could not be doubled. There was foreign exchange crunch, and therefore, even during the first, or was it the second year of the second 5-year plan, that these targets that they had set had to be rolled back, they had to be scaled back, and so it wasn't a thundering success. However, the concept, the strategy, most economists believe that was a good one, and it was not a success primarily because of the hunger and the fallout of the Second World War. And the third 5-year plan also was a continuation and, as a matter of fact, intensification of the second, which meant that heavy industry was again emphasized. The third 5-year plan, Mahalanobis was not the architect or was not the author. Pitambar Pant authored principally the third 5-year plan of India. This is what a major contribution of Mahalanobis to nation building. Again, the success of the second 5-year plan was not palpable enough, primarily because of reasons that I just mentioned. There was no stock of money, as a matter of fact, for public investment. At that time, in Mahalanobis, many of you would know, those of you who are associated with the International Science Academy, at that time, the International Science Academy had a position called Foreign Secretary, does not exist anymore. The Foreign Secretary was the person who would travel to other parts of the world and entice scientists from other parts of the world to come and engage in India, and also build up relationships with foreign academies, foreign science academies. Mahalanobis was for a long period of time the Foreign Secretary of Science Academy in Delhi, and he was also playing a dual role, bringing those scientists, but also was quite partisan, and each one of those scientists would come to India. They would visit other places, but would inevitably visit the Indian Statistical Institute. So anyway, that I can't blame him for that, because that was his institution, and he wanted these people also to come to his institution. He would travel. He traveled to Princeton in March 1946 and met with John von Neumann. And at that time, von Neumann was building the first computer in the world. And Mahalanobis realized the power of these computing machines, and he said that in order for us to develop the nation based on data, we needed something that could crunch numbers rapidly. And he said that it was essential to build up at least one first-rate computing and computation and calculating laboratory in India. And he wrote to Pitambar Pant saying so. And he wrote that this matter deserves an utmost serious attention at an early date, soon after he met von Neumann. He asked von Neumann, could von Neumann help build a computer in India? Well, von Neumann's answer was, I'm building the first computer, but I promise that I will send a computer to India. So von Neumann actually assured Mahalanobis to provide a computer to India. Mahalanobis came back and figured out how much it would cost, and it would cost inordinate amount of money. And so it probably would be unaffordable. So instead, he said that could we not develop ourselves? Could we not develop a computer ourselves? He established the electronics laboratory and workshop at the Indian Statistical Institute in 1950. 1953, India's first electronic computer, an analog computer that was capable of solving multiple simultaneous equations, was built within the country. Digital computers were at that time imported. The first digital computer, HEC2M, was imported from the UK. A Ural machine was imported from the Soviet Union in 1958. And at that time, ISI was the only institution with 2 digital computers in the subcontinent, and it started to serve as a de facto national computing center. Mahalanobis was very interested in declaring Indian Statistical Institute as the seat of the National Computing Center, and he initiated building computers along with Jadavpur University. And as a matter of fact, the first digital computer was built. It's called ISI-JU. It was a vast computer, lot of heat and so on and so forth, but it was certainly built and it was functional. At the same time, Bhabha had set up the TIFR and was also interested in computing, and the TIFR automatic computer called TIFRAC was also built around the same time. And Bhabha also wanted to have TIFR, or wanted to have the National Computing Center in TIFR. The Indian Statistical Institute then went on to import IBM 1401, which is what existed when I entered the ISI in 1970. Then it was replaced by Honeywell, where I got most of my training in computer programming. But then at that time, the tussle between Bhabha and Mahalanobis started. tussle between TIFR and ISI started, neither got the National Computing Center. So, and like I said, this relationship between Hava and Mahalanobis is a separate talk by itself. So as you can see that Mahalanobis did many things, had a huge foresight as to what the nation needed. Aside from the major contribution that he personally made, he also was a key player in institution building and national development. And he had the foresight to imagine what it would take to move our country forward. And he was certainly prophetic in many of the statements that he has made. He passed away in 1972, and this is the last picture of him. And that's his wife, Rani Mahalanobis, and Prasanta Mahalanobis, who passed away. And this is the last picture taken in the building that Prasad talked about. That building is called Amropali, a name that was given by Rabindranath Tagore. Unfortunately, Tagore could never visit that building. He passed away a year or so before the building was habitable, became habitable. So this is Amropali, and Prasad talked about that sofa where people would sit. That sofa still exists. Unfortunately, we don't have those kinds of still art people like Fisher and Haldane visit the Indian Statistical Institute these days. Anyway, so this is Mahalanobis, and I would like to end this talk by quoting presenting to you this particular quote. Not armies, not nations have advanced the race, but here and there in the course of ages, an individual has stood up and cast his shadow over the world. And Mahalanobis was one such person who cast his shadow not only in the nation where he was living, but over the world. He cast his shadow by becoming an architect of statistical science and providing lots of new ideas that are data-driven, that are useful for nation building, not just India, but also for other countries of the world. Thank you very much for your attention.
Great talk, Partha. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It was really wonderful. Even though I studied at IIT Kharagpur, unfortunately, we don't bring the contribution of such great people to the knowledge of our young boys and girls. We did study statistics, but hardly anybody talked about the contribution of Mahalanobis. Whatever you have said today has actually come to very surprising. This is very surprising to us.
Thank you.
Though we have been following the planning in the government, 5-year plans, and many other things, but we rarely remember or even talked about his contribution.
Excellent, excellent, excellent.
So I like to congratulate you for this lecture.
Thank you.
And I think it is important that we take your lecture to wider audience at the universities and colleges.
Happy to give this lecture whenever I'm called upon. Very happy to do this.
Okay. Thank you. We'll have an opportunity in the future to invite you for a physical lecture.
Sure.
Actually.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And now I would like to invite questions or comments from the audience. And I also request Anuj to check if there is anything on the Facebook. Anuj, Facebook check karenge?
Yes, ma'am, I will check.
Okay, Professor Banwet is raising hand. Professor Banwet.
He is from Calcutta.
Yeah, okay. Professor Banwet was our contemporary in IIT Kanpur.
Currently stationed at Calcutta? Are you at Calcutta, Banwet?
Yes, yes.
And now I am at Delhi, Dwarka. Of course, nice seeing both of you, Dharamveer and Kia, and also Professor Kainth. And I'm reminded of one of our research scholars who did his PhD in operations research, S.K. Bhatt, who had then later on joined the war people at ISI Kolkata. So it was very encouraging to hear this talk and about Mahalanobis. And as Dharam rightly points out, that though we learned to OR, etc., but in terms of the contributions of Professor Mahalanobis, people really never touched upon this particular topic. And I'm glad, very glad to hear all these contributions that are there. And I'm really wondering that the planning commission that we had and with the that would now into Niti Ayog as to what is the continuity and whether people have totally forgotten Mahalanobis and his principles that were laid down. And the other thing is good transference from physics to statistics to economics to national development. I think that is what is more important. Of course, Kia and Dharamveer have the physics slant in them. I too had done my physics honors for 1 year being short of age. So I think that's a very good trend that the bringing in of disciplines together for overall national development. I enjoyed the lecture thoroughly and certainly we would like to hear more of such contributions of the real seeds which have were planted. I think that's really very good. So thank you for this opportunity and I congratulate the team of Dharam and Kia for this lovely lecture series. So luckily I get through these invitations and I'm very much privileged to hear them. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Benwit, I presume you must have taken my course on statistical quality control.
Yes.
And please do provide your contact details.
Yes, वो हम ग्रांट की किताब जो है statistical quality control पीले रंग वाली, I used to use it and metrology also, the part that you had taken.
Right, metrology and statistical quality control.
हमें पूरा याद है डॉक्टर साहब. I was with Professor Gulati, of course.
It's amazing that you remember so much.
Gulati moved to Bombay.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Professor Banwet, I just want to mention to you that Professor S.K. Bhatt, when he came to ISI, actually was a teacher of mine. He actually taught us optimization techniques when I was doing my bachelor's in statistics. Then he migrated to Canada and I've seen him after then.
I think Manitoba or something he had gone there.
Yes, he went away to Canada. Don't exactly know where, but he did teach us for a year optimization techniques when we were studying our bachelor's.
Wonderful reminiscences. Now, Dr. Rajendra Singh wants to make some comments or questions. Rajendra Singh.
This time I waited so that I'm not always the first to ask the questions. So first of all, thank you very much for the nice lecture. At some places, I learned new things, and also there was some refreshing of the history of science in this direction for me. First of all, what Professor Ramaswamy said in the very beginning, that we should not talk only about the things which went right. I think we can also learn from the stories what went wrong so that the same mistakes are not made again and again. That was what comment. Then the next is now I'm writing on S.R. Khasgi, he was professor in Dhaka, then at the Banaras University, Post Institute, University of Kolkata, and his last station was Vishwa Bharati. Still, I have collected about 2,000 pages of his writings document, but still I don't have family records or photograph. I will be thankful if any of the audience, he or she can help me in getting this material. Now, my question on Professor Majumder. I was not aware that Mahalanobis, he also resigned from the Vishwa Bharati. I knew that S.N. Bose, he was vice president of the Vishwa Bharati. He too resigned. could it be the reason that the family of great poet had other understanding of science than the scientists like Mahalanobis and S.N. Bose? What you will say about it as internal person who knows history of Bengal plus Vishwabharati plus about the institution? What will be your comment about it?
So I can only speculate because there is no documentation, and I have been interested in history of science. And so I look for documented evidence. There is no documentation. The sentence that I've read, that's probably the only document that hints that Rabindranath Tagore, Rabindranath's son, and Mahalanobis had developed, fractures, mental fractures over a period of time. Why could this have happened? Again, these are matters of speculation. Rabindranath sent Rabindranath Tagore to the University of Iowa to learn some aspects of farming because Rabindranath wanted to initiate Sriniketan, which he eventually did, to bring in practices of modern farming. These three people, including Rabindranath, came back and initiated some of these activities. Mahalanobis was an indulgent person, so he may have said a few things that did not jive well, did not go well. So I think over a period of time, there was little friction between the two. And Rabindranath always thought that this is my father's domain. This is my father's kingdom. And who is Mahalanobis? And Mahalanobis thought that, he's so close. And Rabindranath Tagore actually relied on Mahalanobis very much, took him to, on his tours abroad and so on and so forth. These were two people, one of whom was by, mental relationship was trying to grab Rabindranath or latch on to Rabindranath. The other, by virtue of being a son, was trying to latch on to his father. And obviously, these little frictions would happen. And this is what I would surmise had happened between Mahalanobis and Rabindranath. But with respect to S.N. Bose, again, I really don't know why he had resigned. But Mahalanobis did resign, and that's documented.
Yeah, because I was about S.N. Bose, Shanti Chatterjee. He has written little bit, but not giving any detail. Yeah, so that is, I thought maybe you know more than what is said about S.N. Bose. So that was my expectations.
No.
Okay, thank you.
Very interesting. In fact, why people resign from certain bodies is always shrouded in mystery. I have asked so many people why Raman resigned from his Fellowship of Royal Society. There has been no answer so far.
Yes, there is some answer.
Really? Would you like to share it now?
I wrote one article in Current Science. It is at least 15 years ago. The one speculation is, that is what Ramaswamy wrote that C.V. Raman, he sent one article to the proceeding of the Royal Society London, and they refused to publish. He was pissed off, he resigned. So he said, no, he's no more fellow. The other story is that in 1971 or in this about this time, one British newspaper published the name of the fellow of Royal Society London, and Raman's name was missing from the list. So that is told it was due to this reason he resigned. I tried to find out the newspaper. I found there were no any names. So then I wrote letter to the Royal Society London whether there are documents. They sent me document, Raman's letter, that he resigned, but they say we don't tell further how the Royal Society London decided about it. That is, I can send this article also. So this means 100% we still don't know, but these are the 3 points which are known from the documents.
Yeah, I have read that article of yours, but then these are patients, right?
Yeah.
Nothing recorded.
So Partha, how was the relationship between Mahalanobis, Meghnad Saha, and J.C. Ghosh? Because they are contemporaries, okay? And Meghnad Saha was the member of the Planning
Also,
Commission
yeah.
till he passed away in 1956. And after Bhatnagar and Saha passed away, then J.C. Ghosh arrived, and J.C. Ghosh again passed away in 59. And the person who continued with Nehru and beyond Nehru is Mahalanobis. So were they all on the same page always, or they had some differences?
So, Mr. Grover, I actually have not studied the Planning Commission papers. If any of these, the kind of questions that you're asking would be revealed, they would be in the Planning Commission papers in the Nehru Museum. But I actually have not had the time to go to Nehru Archives and Museum and study those papers. I did look at what's available at the ISI. Neither Meghnad Saha nor J.C. Ghosh was actually involved in any affairs of the institute, and as a result, we don't have any documentation regarding any correspondence or any other kinds of notes that Mahalanobis may have made, so we don't really know. The only person with whom Mahalanobis had very intimate relationship was S.N. Bose, and we do have a lot of information. And as a matter of fact, I've seen S.N. Bose on the campus of ISI. Other than that, the two other names that you're talking about, those would be in the Planning Commission papers, and I have actually not researched them. And by the way, there are no Planning Commission papers in ISI. They have all been taken away by the government of India.
But they should be available in the archives, National Archives.
Certainly. It should be available in the Nehru Archive and Museum for sure.
Any correspondence between J.C. Ghosh and Mahalanobis?
No.
No. Because they are contemporaries,
Yes. Nothing.
J.C. Ghosh also went to the Planning Commission for some time.
Yes.
Yeah. Before Mahalanobis, because as Saha passes away in 56, it is J.C. Ghosh who comes to Delhi to aid Nehru. But Naga goes away 55, 1st January. Then Saha goes away in 56. So the person who fills up the gap in between is J.C. Ghosh. After he has set up the IIT Kharagpur and via the Calcutta University, then he is now back in Delhi assisting Nehru. By that time, as from your description, it's clear that Mahalanobis was also already coming in to start writing the second plan. And I'm also curious to know the relationship between K.N. Raj, who was very young when he wrote the first plan. See, Mahalanobis was age 60 and K.N. Raj was an economist age 30 when he wrote the first plan.
Yes.
And, so
the relationship between K.N. Raj and Mahalanobis was very good. As a matter of fact, K.N. Raj has written good things about the second 5-year plan, even though the first 5-year plan, the second 5-year plan completely deviated from what he had written in the first 5-year plan. Agriculture is the main focus versus heavy industry in the second 5-year plan focus. Yet K.N. Raj thought that was a good strategy, and we do have documentation of that.
Because by the time the third 5-year plan comes, the Chinese war with China had happened, So third 5-year plan was a very difficult period for India.
Yes.
But can you elaborate on the contribution of Mahalanobis on agriculture? Because agriculture had become a tool by Americans and many other countries to manipulate India. If you look at it, that it was Lal Bahadur Shastri who brought agriculture in sharp focus in 65 after Pakistan, war with the Pakistan. He coined Jai Jawan, Jai Kisan. So why is it that why Mahalanobis could not emphasize on the hunger and agriculture?
again, the papers that exist, except that like I said, that I have not read the Planning Commission papers, but whatever exists, Mahalanobis' idea was that after all, you had to become dependent on machines. Everything could not be done on humans. Even for agriculture, you needed tractors and so on and so forth. Although we had lots of farmers, but still he believed that you needed to depend on machinery. Yeah, machines would eventually not replace but help humans to increase agricultural production, whatever. But if we needed to import all machinery, then that would not be a good thing for India in the long run. And he said that it is better to initiate heavy industry, because, and he wrote this, machines to produce machines. So he wanted heavy industry to produce light machines, and therefore we needed steel and we needed various kinds of chemicals and so on. So that's what the thrust was. So he said that even for improvement in agriculture, there's only so much that you can go without machines, just using humans, and you needed machines to improve agriculture. And that's all documented in the preparatory documents of the plan frame, and I've seen that. So he was not, that's the reason why he said that rather than doing it on agriculture, we would invest in those aspects of the economy which would eventually help in the longer run. The other thing that he did was in agriculture, using statistical science, was just this, that you needed to again implement sampling concepts in order to estimate grain yield. You couldn't cut fields of paddy to estimate, because that would not be the appropriate way of doing it. So how do you sample in order to estimate grain yield on a nationwide basis? This was one contribution that Mahalanobis made. And without making the estimates of the grain yield, you don't know how much stockpiling would be done and how much you needed to do that. So import, export, and stockpiling, all of this depended on good estimates of the grain yield of different kinds of grains. And Mahalanobis actually implemented methods of sampling from fields to estimate grain yield. So that was another contribution in the field of agriculture.
You see, heavy industries at Ranchi, heavy machines, machine tools, and BHEL, Bharat Heavy Electricals, and subsequently machine tool industry at Bangalore. I have been associated with All India Machine Tools and Research all my life. Apparently, these have been probably rather the first priority of the second 5-year plan, which Mahalanobis probably was the designer. In fact, he had visited before giving this report North America, USA, as well as UK, and John mentioned he met there. Rather, she was also invited to India to deliver some lectures. Likewise, he met in France Marxists of that time, as well as he went to Moscow to have conversations with top economists there. Apparently, he had put in a large effort really to give a report for the second planning commission. Thank you, sir.
So did Baba draw any inspiration from Mahalanobis for creation of TIFR? Because ISI predates, see, TISS comes up in 1936. Tata Memorial Hospital comes up later. So whereas the ISI is there as a part of Physics Department of Presidency much earlier. After all, TIFR was also created in the Physics Department of Indian Institute of Science. So they are similar beginnings. And Baba relied on Bhatnagar to fund TIFR until the Department of Atomic Energy happens. And Department of Atomic Energy happens only in 1954. Till 1954, TIFR was getting all its financial money through the CSIR budget. Of course, we are going to have a talk by Ravi Grover on atomic energy and so on, so forth. But I think this part of it is not very well disseminated, the pioneering contribution of Mahalanobis in institution building and nation building in India. His planning commission role is there, but there is a great role that he has played long before the independence happens.
Yeah,
like Bhatta, there is Bhattnagar, there is Saha. There should also be a similar story on Mahalanobis.
Yeah, but again, I mean, in the papers that are there in the archives at the ISI, there are no letters or exchanges between Bhabha and Mahalanobis, except when there is
an age difference. Bhabha is born 1909. Mahalanobis is 16 years elder to him.
Right.
So Mahalanobis has already lived major part. And other great difference between Mahalanobis and Bhabha is that Mahalanobis has done all his science on his own in India. There is no contribution of Cambridge to Mahalanobis. He was working with C.T.R. Wilson. He would have done cloud chamber, high energy, and so on. Before Mahalanobis, it was D.M. Bose who worked with C.T.R. Wilson. Right? So Mahalanobis' contribution is as great as a scientist to nation building as that of Saha and Bhatnagar. I would put Saha, Bhatnagar, Saha first, and then Mahalanobis and Bhatnagar. Maybe Mahalanobis earlier than even Bhatnagar, because Bhatnagar comes into picture only when the CSR comes into being, and Bhatnagar is picked up by the British to create something, whereas he is doing it all on his own.
That's true.
Like Saha, like Saha does everything on his own. Mahalanobis also is doing everything on his own. Raman did everything on his own. So it's, this is a different class. B.P. Paul does more or less things on his own in the IARI after returning and joining IARI in Bihar in 1936. So it's good, this Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav and also this movie on Rocket Boys. We need many more movies on other Rocket Boys, precursor to Rocket Boys.
I would say that lecture was excellent, that it has given a lot of information which is not in public domain. So I'd like to thank. It's in
public domain, but not, this is a thing which should go to the civic society for us.
Yeah, that's right. It's a matter of national pride that his contribution led to.
Lecture should be heard by students in the universities of India.
That's right.
That is where it should be heard during the Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav. That would be a real dissemination of how India has developed.
So, would you be, Professor Majumder ji, would you like to give a lecture on the growth of agriculture in India?
I'm not competent. That's not my core area of competence.
Because that was one of the major area where science and technology were used.
Yes, but that's not my competence, and I won't be able to do it.
Okay. So I'll call you up later to discuss possibly of to explore the possibility of your other lectures on other themes. The technological development, if possible, or something related to that.
Sure.
Okay, then अनुज एक बार Facebook चेक कर लीजिए, है कुछ?
Facebook पे नहीं है मैम, no.
No ma'am.
Not even a comment?
Best compliments from Sanjeev Java.
Jairoop Singh ji, would you like to say something?
Oh, I was just saying it was a wonderful talk. I enjoyed very much. A lot of new information I got, which I wasn't aware of. Thank you, Partha, for it.
Thank you, Jairoop. Thank you very much. Good to see you after some time.
Yeah. Nice to see you.
Okay, so in that case, would you like to say something else?
No, I'd like to thank Professor Majumder for such an excellent overview of the subject that he discussed. In fact, since I dealt with agriculture and many other items and many other sectors during my service, so I could relate to what was happening in India during mid-60s and 70s. And therefore, this lecture became they took me back to my past service. So thank you very much. I'll connect with you for exploring lectures on few other subjects.
Thank you very
And
much.
I'd like to thank you, I'd like
you.
to thank Grover for bringing you to us and connecting us with you. In fact, Grover has been exploring, and I would like to thank Ramaswamy ji, who was our contemporary IIT Kanpur. I'd like to thank Satyamurthy ji and Kant, because they also have been helping us, guiding us from time to time. Satyamurthy ji, particularly to you, that you have guided us, and you have, in fact, we started this organization when you were here as Director IISER. And you would recollect that we had meeting at your place, and you encouraged me and others to form this society, which has now grown with the support of many more, particularly Professor Grover. Thank you very much, and I will say Jai Hind to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Partha.
Thank you. Thank you.
With
Bye,
this,
everybody.
we close today. You can see the upcoming lectures for May.
Professor Inder Pal Singh and Professor
Pal Singh has,
and guest of honor would be Professor Agrawal.
Agrawal. He himself is a Bhatnagar Prize awardee.
Okay. So
Inderpal Singh ji has written many articles on doing a statistical analysis of SSB prize winners in India.
Okay, that would be nice to hear. Maybe a separate lecture.
Yeah.
Yeah, in fact, it is that Shanti Sarovar Bhatnagar prizes and international. Okay, thanks a lot for
Thank you.
That
Thank
lecture.
you.
Thank you, boy.
Jarpur Singh ji, would you like to say something?
No.
Satyamurthy ji, would you like to say something? You have been a force behind us. Pillar. Satyamurthy ji?
He has left.
In fact, we formed this society. When we were thinking of forming this society, we held a meeting in his conference room. And he encouraged us to use his facilities for launching the SPSTI. So, and Grover Saab, thank you very much for bringing such excellent people for excellent on excellent topics.
Thank you, Sumanji, Professor
And
Kant, for
Kant Saab has been our teacher, always enjoyed his blessings. And I'm also grateful to Rajendra Singh ji, who's joining us from Germany. And he has also been guiding us. So is Suman Beri ji. Banward, thank you very much.